He woke to silence. The kind of silence that only exists where too many have died. Takezō's eyes opened slowly, and the world above him swam into view. Low gray clouds drifting like torn banners of a defeated army. Around him, bodies lay twisted in every direction. Stiff arms frozen mid-strike, faces turned upward as if still begging heaven for one last breath. For a moment, he wasn't sure if he too was dead. His skin felt cold, his limbs heavy like wet stones. When he tried to move, a shock of pain shot through his thighs, sharp, real, undeniable. "So I'm still alive." A fly buzzed near his ear. The stench of blood and wet earth filled his lungs. Each breath tasted metallic, like he was inhaling the battlefield itself. Above him, raindrops slid across his face, and he opened his mouth instinctively, not to speak, but simply to drink, because the dead do not thirst. For a long moment, Takezō couldn't tell whether he was rising from death or sinking deeper into it. His mind floated somewhere between dream and delirium, where nothing had a clear shape. Not the sky, not the bodies beside him, not even his own thoughts. He tried to lift his hand, barely moved. His fingers felt like they belonged to someone else. Stiff, numb, almost brittle. A dull ache throbbed through his thigh, pulsing slowly like a hidden drum. He didn't yet know there were 2 bullets buried in his flesh. He only felt the heavy, dragging weight of a wounded animal trying to stand. His throat burned, the kind of dryness that makes a man forget speech and crave only one thing: water. A single raindrop touched his lips, and he felt it as if it were a blessing sent from the heavens. When the next drop fell, he opened his mouth, letting the thin trickle wash over his tongue. Am I alive? Or just dying slowly? The question echoed in him without urgency. Survival didn't feel heroic. It felt accidental, like a leaf clinging to a branch long after the storm has passed. But somewhere deep inside, a small, stubborn spark refused to fade. The battlefield no longer felt like a place where men had fought. It felt like the world itself had collapsed and forgotten to rise again. The typhoon had passed only hours earlier, but its signature remained everywhere. Mud stretched across the plain like a dark, wet skin. Pools of rainwater filled the depressions where bodies had fallen, turning armor into silent basins and severed hands into pale, drifting shapes underneath the surface. Takezō slowly turned his head. Time had moved on, but the dead had not. Some lay with their faces half submerged in mud, eyes still open to a sky they could no longer see. Others were slumped against their weapons, as if frozen mid-breath. The rain had washed away the blood, leaving their skin smooth and fish-like under the cold daylight. A broken banner flapped weakly in the breeze, a reminder that armies had clashed here, that men had screamed and charged and believed their actions mattered. But now everything was quiet. Even the wind seemed cautious, whispering gently across the plain, careful not to disturb the thousands lying motionless. Takezō felt no horror, only an unsettling stillness, a truth he could not escape. The world moves on, with or without the living. Takezō's vision began to blur at the edges, as if the world were dissolving into mist. Shapes shimmered, then faded. Voices rose and fell like echoes in a cave, some familiar, some impossible. He blinked hard, but the fog inside his mind only thickened. For an instant, he thought he saw his sister standing beside a fallen soldier. Then she vanished like smoke. Another moment, he imagined hearing his mother's voice calling his childhood name. It drifted across the field, soft and warm. Impossibly warm for a place so cold. He wasn't sure anymore which world he stood in, the world of the living, or the world of those who hadn't yet realized they were dead. Pain became his only anchor. Sharp, throbbing, relentless. Every pulse of agony from his wounded leg dragged him back into his body, reminding him he still existed. Strange as it was, the pain felt honest. More honest than the fading images around him. A realization flickered through him, faint but unmistakable. Pain is proof. Pain means you are still here. It wasn't comfort. It was clarity. The boundary between life and death felt thin, like a paper screen he could push through with one more breath. He sensed something shifting within him, a seed of awareness planted by suffering itself. Not strength, not courage, something quieter, deeper, the beginning of a mind that refuses to die simply because the world expects it to. Later, people would call it Musashi's discipline. But here, in the mud of Sekigahara, it was just a wounded boy discovering that pain can wake a man up long before wisdom does. A faint rustle broke through Takezō's drifting thoughts. At first he assumed it was another hallucination, another shadow of the dead turning in his mind. But then he heard it again. A weak, trembling whisper calling his name. "Takezō, are you alive?" The voice didn't come from memory, came from just a few feet away. "Matahachi." Takezō forced his head to turn, and through the scattered bodies he saw his childhood friend crawling toward him, elbows dragging through the mud, face pale with terror. He looked less like a warrior and more like a frightened boy lost in a nightmare he couldn't escape. Takezō felt something stir inside him. Not relief, not joy, but a strange pull back into the world of the living. "Don't you die," he muttered, voice cracking. "If I'm alive, you're alive." Their fingers touched first, small, desperate, almost childish. For a moment, it was the same gesture they used to seal promises in the village fields. Only now, instead of promises, it was survival that bound them. Side by side, they lay silent, one trembling with fear, the other held together by stubborn will. Two different hearts, two different fates, yet one path beginning in the same sea of death. Waking up among the dead is not just a physical experience. It is a psychological fracture, a spiritual threshold. Most men, when surrounded by so much loss, collapse inward. Their minds fold, their will breaks. They accept death long before it reaches them. But for a rare few, the opposite happens. The nearness of death doesn't crush them. It awakens something ancient and instinctive, a clarity that only appears when everything else is stripped away. Takezō didn't yet know which kind of man he was. He only knew that when he opened his eyes, he felt two forces pulling at him. One whispering, "Let go, it's over." The other, quieter but more stubborn, saying, "Not yet." That second voice is what separates survivors from casualties. Not strength, not skill, just a small ember of refusal. A refusal to die, a refusal to surrender, a refusal to let the world decide his ending. The battlefield became a mirror. In the stillness of thousands who would never rise again, Takezō saw a truth. A man is not reborn in peace. He is reborn in the moments when peace becomes impossible. The dead around him were not only bodies. They were reminders of what happens when a mind follows fear, and what happens when a mind follows purpose. He did not yet have a name like Musashi. He did not yet understand discipline or strategy or the way, but the seed was planted here, in mud, blood, and silence. The seed of a man who would learn to live fully, because he had once been so close to death. As the sky dimmed above the ruined plain, Takezō lay still, listening to the quiet that followed disaster. It wasn't the peace of safety, it was the silence that comes when the world has already taken everything it can from you. In that silence, he felt something gently shift within him. Not hope, not strength, simply awareness. A faint understanding that life isn't returned to a man all at once. Comes back in breaths, in aches, in decisions, and in the quiet acceptance of what must be faced next. He didn't rise with certainty. He didn't rise with courage. He rose because something inside him refused to remain among the dead. Every rebirth begins this way, not with triumph, but with stillness. A moment where a man realizes the world will not carry him forward, so he must take the first step himself. And for Takezō, that first step was simply deciding to live.